Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel. I hope that you are all good. In today's video, we're going to be doing a spring pink and white acrylic design set. So I really hope you all enjoy watching. I have already got my Glamerliz ready to go so we can jump straight in to do the design. But if you would like to see how I prep my Glamerliz, apply my tips and a thin clear acrylic base, I will leave a link to a recent video I did either in the description box or in the cards above, which shows you guys all of that. Moving on to today's design, I'm going to be doing a classic pink and white French nail on this nail. So I'm beginning by building up my extended smile line, and I'm doing this with CJP Fantasy. So I placed that bead of acrylic down, blended it slightly into that natural nail bed, and then I'm just creating the shape that I want my smile line to be. I want this one to be quite rounded but fairly deep, just because I quite like deep smile lines or when I'm doing a longer nail. So I'm using the sides of my brush to perfect the shape of that smile line, but it doesn't matter if it's not perfect because I will come in and file it anyway. Once I'm happy with the rough shape and how this first bead is applied, I'm going to come in with my second bead of acrylic, and I'm placing that down on that nail bed area, and you'll see I press it down and then I'm just pushing it back slightly to blend it in again to that natural nail bed area. Then I'm going to pull the sides of that bead of acrylic in and down over the previous bead of acrylic. Again, I want to keep this bead, I want this bead to still have that deep smile line shape to it, so I'm not taking it all the way out to the sides. And then I'm using the tip and the sides of my brush to continue creating that smile line shape. Smoothing everything out to keep it as even and as smooth as possible. The less bumps and lumps you have in your acrylic, the less filing you're going to have to do later on. And as you can see, I'm really pushing into that acrylic now that it has started to set, so that I'm able to get the shape as even and as neat as I can. Then I'm going to come in with my cuticle bead. I'm really tilting that finger down as I place down my cuticle bead, and then I'm using the very tip of my brush to push it up into place. And then I'm just going to pull the top of that bead of acrylic down and blend it over the previous acrylic. You want to make sure when you're working in that cuticle area that you're getting your product as close to the cuticle as possible without touching the skin. If you do get any on the skin, you are more than likely going to get lifting, so it's always advisable to just avoid that cuticle area. I'm still using the sides and the tip of my brush just to make that smile line as neat as I can. And then I'm going to leave this to set because it needs to be fully set before we come in and file. So I'm going to move on to work on the pointer finger. Now the pointer finger, I want it to be a full white nail. So I'm coming in with CJP Snow White. Now Snow White is the most pigmented white acrylic that CJP do. However, I personally find it a little bit tricky to work with. Like a lot of white acrylics, it can be quite sticky, and I find that you need to work with it a little bit more on the drier side than what I did here. So this nail didn't go as neat as I would have liked it to have gone. However, it wasn't nothing I couldn't fix with my file. So I placed that first bead of acrylic down, blended in the back of the bead, and then I've just walked it down to the very tip. Because CJP Snow White is a core powder, it doesn't need to be encapsulated, so I'm going to build the entire nail with this colour. So here I've picked up quite a large bead of acrylic. It's probably a lot easier to work with smaller beads when you're working with a colour that you find tricky, but I did come in with quite a large bead of acrylic. So I've blended in the back of the bead slightly, and then I'm just pulling the sides of that bead of acrylic down the nail and then the top of it. And this is where you can see it's quite sticky. It's wanting to stick to my brush, and just a little bit trickier to work with. In all honesty, I haven't used this colour that often to work with. When I'm working with a white from CJP, I tend to use Milky Pink or Coconut Milk because they're that little bit softer, therefore they're a little bit easier to work with. So I definitely need to just have a bit more of a practice and a play with this one. But as you can see, I'm running my brush over it quite a lot just to try and smooth that acrylic out because I noticed it was looking quite uneven. And then I'm going to come in with my cuticle bead. So I'm placing that down the same as before, just slightly away from that cuticle area, and then using the tip of my brush to tap it up into place. Now, as I was tapping this into place, I noticed I missed that corner here. So I do come in with another small bead of acrylic just to pop a little bit more product down and make sure that there's none missing. But I'm just going around with my brush to neaten it up as much as possible. And with that last bead of acrylic, I have left the bulk of it in that back third to create our apex area. You want to make sure your apex is the thickest part of the nail, and then it tapers off down towards your free edge, which is going to be the thinnest part of the nail. So here I'm coming in with a tiny bead of acrylic just to perfect that cuticle area. So I tapped it into place and then blended it down. And here you can see the nail, like I said, it's quite uneven and lumpy bumpy, but I am able to fix it further along with my file anyway, so it's not too much of a big deal. I just personally try to work with my acrylic as neat as possible so that I have minimal filing to do, because I absolutely hate filing. Now, as I was looking at this nail, I did feel as though the tip of the nail looked a little bit too thin. And although you want your tip to be quite thin, you don't want it too thin that it's going to snap off. So I just popped down another small bead of acrylic there just to thicken that up a little bit. We're then going to move on and do the ring finger. So the ring finger is another full colour nail. This time I'm using that Fantasy again. So because these nails are quite long, I'm starting to work roughly 3/4 of the way down the nail with my acrylic. I've placed that first bead of acrylic down, and as you can see, I'm just walking it and tapping it down towards that very free edge of the nail, just patting the acrylic from side to side and pulling off any excess. Whenever you see my brush go out of shot, that's when I'm usually wiping off any acrylic that's stuck to my brush. You want to make sure you're keeping your brush as clean as possible, because if you have any acrylic stuck into it, more acrylic is going to tend to stick to that acrylic. So it's always advisable to work as clean as possible with your brush. So I'm wiping it off quite a lot. I'm then going to come in with my second bead of acrylic and just work my way up the nail. If I'm doing nails like this, sometimes I'll do it in 3 beads, sometimes 4, sometimes it might even be more. It doesn't really matter how many beads of acrylic you use, as long as you build up your strength and structure. So I'm just working my way up the nail, applying that acrylic. Every time I place down a bead, I'm trying to blend it out over the previous bead of acrylic, just so that the colour flows nicely and that there's no inconsistency with the colour. So here with this bead, you'll see I place it down. I always tap back at the back of the bead and just blend it in slightly, and then I pull the sides and the center of that product down the nail, leaving the bulk of it where I've placed it. I'm using quite light strokes with my brush, so it's not pulling too much of the product away from where I've applied it. You can sometimes find that if you pull or press down with your acrylic too hard, you'll pull more of your product off than what you want. And when I'm working, I kind of want to leave the bulk of the product that I'm applying right where I've applied it. So you'll see here with my cuticle bead, I've applied it right down at the cuticle area, tapped it into place, and then I'm just pulling the top of that bead of acrylic down just to blend it in. Keeping my sidewalls as neat as possible, again, so that I have minimal finish filing to do. And I'm always smoothing over that acrylic to try and make sure it's as smooth as possible. And I love CJP Fantasy. I have to say, it's an absolute dream to work with. It's one of my favourite core powders because of how easy it is to work with. Now we're going to move on to the little finger. So I'm coming in with that CJP Snow White again, and we're going to be doing a baby boomer. So I've placed that bead of acrylic down, blended out the back of the bead, and then I'm just walking it down to the very tip of the nail. Very similar to how we did on the pointer finger, except for I'm trying to keep it a lot thinner because I'm going to be encapsulating this nail. Now it didn't quite reach to the tip of the nail, so I'm coming in with another small bead just to finish that off. So I've placed it down, I've blended it back, and then I'm just going to tap and walk that down towards the free edge. With the white acrylic, you want to make sure you're wiping your brush off quite a lot. You can also dip it back into the monomer and then wipe it off again, just to make sure that you're not getting any acrylic stuck in your brush where that white can be a little bit sticky. Now I'm going to leave the white acrylic to set, because whenever I'm doing an ombre, I like to let my white or whatever colour I've used on the tip set first before I come in with my next colour. So whilst I'm waiting for that to set, I've jumped back to that extended nail bed and I'm coming in and just filing it crisp. Because I have created a lot of the shape with the acrylic and using my brush, I'm mainly using my file just to make sure both sides look even, and then also to make sure they're nice and crisp, so that when we apply our white acrylic and file through, we've got a nice, neat, sharp smile line. And I'm just using, I flip between using the 100 and the 180 grit side of the file, depending on whether I feel as though it needs more filing in certain areas. The CJP acrylics file absolutely beautifully, so I didn't need to do too much work to it. And then I just made sure to remove all of the dust before coming in and applying my white acrylic. Now again, you will see I do struggle a little with applying the white here. I was working a little too wet because I wanted to have a little bit more control over the product, but then just it's white acrylic. It's a bit of a nightmare to work with, to be honest. I much prefer the softer whites that are a little bit easier to work with. But I wanted to have a really bright white acrylic colour here. If you have any tips or tricks for working with white acrylic, please do pop them in the comments below. But all I'm doing is I've placed down that first bead of acrylic right at the free edge, and I'm starting to push it and walk it down the free edge of the nail and up into those wings as well. Then I'm going to come in with another bead of acrylic, place this right down at the side of the nail so that we're getting right down into those wings. Because this is quite a deep smile line, I really want to make sure that all of that acrylic gets down there and there's no gaps or any places where there's no acrylic, because otherwise when we file, you're going to have a clear patch and it's going to ruin the overall effect. So when I'm doing a smile line, because there's something I struggle with a little bit, I prefer to come in with several beads to make sure that I've applied the acrylic everywhere it needs to be. Now it doesn't matter if your white acrylic overlaps your extended nail bed, because you will file off that excess when it comes to finish filing, and you'll reveal that neat smile line that you've created underneath. So at this point it doesn't really matter if it's looking a little bit messy. I'm trying to keep this as neat as possible when it comes to that acrylic at the sidewalls of the nail. You don't want too much of it coming off of your clear base, because again, you're going to have more filing to do. So I'm trying to work as neat as I can. Then I'm going to come in, apply another bead, always blending it back into the previous bead of acrylic. And I'm just going to walk this bead down towards the free edge just to finish off the very tip of the nail. And one of the things I love about doing a French or a colour block now, I actually really like how messy it looks at this point, and then you come in and you file it and reveal this nice nail. It always makes me smile. I do also leave the finish filing in for this nail, so you see how I file my French nails and how I finish up filing. That's one of the reasons why this video is quite a bit longer, because I've left the full application process for the acrylic in, all of the nail art and crystal placements, and then I also left in some filing so that you guys could sort of see a bit more of an in-depth acrylic tutorial going right from the start to the end. So now I'm going to jump back to that baby boomer, and I'm going to come in with the CJP Fantasy. So that first bead of acrylic I place down slightly wetter, and I place it right down at that blend area, blend it back slightly, and then pull it down over the Snow White. And I personally find that Snow White and Fantasy create such a beautiful, effortless ombre. They both are two very pigmented colours, but they blend together absolutely beautifully, and they're definitely one of my favourite CJP ombre combos. I just think the brightness from the white really complements the CJP Fantasy, so that's why I do sometimes opt to use in Snow White rather than coconut milk in certain sets. I'm then going to come in and encapsulate this nail, because we want to make sure we protect that blend when it comes to filing. So I'm picking up a bead of my CJP Crystal Glass, placing it down roughly in that apex area, and then I'm just tapping and pulling it down the nail to fully encapsulate. So as well as protecting the fade that we've created, we're also building up the rest of our strength and structure here. That bead of acrylic didn't quite reach all the way to the free edge, so I'm coming in with another small bead of acrylic, blending it back and then pulling it down towards the free edge, just to make sure that that tip of the nail has got enough thickness there. This is what the nails looked like once I'd finished applying all of the acrylic. So I'm going to come in and file now. Now I have already filed the pointer, the ring and the little finger, and I did all of the filing by hand today. So I'm going to come in with my hand file and do the middle finger. Now I'm using the 180 grit side of my nail file, and to begin with on the French I always like to file off a lot of the bulk excess white acrylic that we've applied. So I'm just coming over and focusing on those areas to begin with. Now it is a little bit trickier to file on the Glamerliz, so that's why I'm constantly stopping to just slide my tip back in. If you use longer base nail tips, then you don't always have this problem, but the ones I'm using are a little bit shorter, so they don't go as far down into the wells as what they could do, which means filing is a little bit trickier, but I wanted to leave it in so that you could see a little bit more of the full process of an acrylic set. But all I'm doing is moving my file around as much as possible. So you don't want to continue filing in one area, especially when you're working on yourself or a client, because it can start heating up and feel quite hot for the client. So that's why I'm moving the file around rather than always just filing in one spot. I have sped this video up so you might not be able to tell, but here and there I am stopping just to check the nail, check it from all angles so I can see what areas need more filing. So I was just pointing out there's a little bit more of white excess acrylic down there, so I'm just focusing on there for the moment. And then once I've finished filing off most of the excess acrylic, I'm going to look at the nail again from all angles and then begin my more finished file routine. So to begin with, I like to neaten up the free edge a little bit. So I'm just coming straight down to start creating that more sharp stiletto shape. I'm just trying to use the length of my file to do this, but like I said, I do struggle to keep with my normal filing routine when I'm working on the Glamerliz hand. That's why I don't really leave filing in on the hand too much. Then once I'm sort of more happy with the shape I've created, I'm going to remove some of the bulk from the side walls of the nail. So I'm just coming up one side and then down the other side, just because any excess bulk you remove that doesn't need to be there from your acrylic will help you create your sharp shape. And then I'm just coming over the surface of the nail just to smooth out any lumps or bumps that there might be. And then I do just continue this process of doing a little bit of filing, stopping and looking at the nail, and then more filing, just so that I'm focusing my file on the areas that need it. You don't want to end up over filing the nail and removing too much of the acrylic. When I'm going around that cuticle area, I'm trying to avoid taking off too much of the apex, so I'm focusing my file on the cuticle zone only. And then once I am happy with the overall filing, I will just come in and shape the nail up a little bit more. But as you can see, I am still faffing around with filing. I probably spend a lot more time on filing than most because I'm just really trying to perfect it and get into a bit more of a filing routine so that it does end up a little bit quicker. But at the moment, it's something I do seem to spend quite a lot of time on. Now that I am happy, I'm just coming in and shaping up the nail a little bit more. So I'm using the length of my file just to create that shape. I did sort of feel as though the top wasn't completely smooth, so I ended up coming back in with my file here to smooth that out a little bit. At this point, I'm quite happy with how the nail shape looks from this angle, but what I'm going to do is flip my hand around and look at it from the other way and then just neaten it up anywhere that it might be, just because if you were working on a client, flipping the hand round, you're viewing it from how they would view their hand, which is most important because they're the ones that's looking at their nails the most. So I just like to flip it around to make sure I'm 100% happy with the shape. You can also see that I'm running my thumb over the nail a lot. This is just to help help fill any bumps that you might not necessarily be able to see. And then if I do feel as though there are any lumps or bumps, or if there's something that feels slightly uneven, I can come in and do a little bit more filing. Once I was finally happy with the filing, I'm just going to come in and give the nails a quick buff. I don't want to over buff them, but I want them to have a nice smooth surface and remove any of the scratches that the file might have left. So I'm just giving them a quick buff using my Kiki London buffer. And then once I had finished buffing them off camera, I did give the nails a really good clean. When you're working on a silicone hand, the dust is like a magnet to it. So I personally like to go and give it a wash in some warm soapy water just to remove all of that dust so that we've got a nice clean surface to work on with our nail art. Now for nail art, I'm going to be using these beautiful decals from Miss Lucy. I will leave a link in the description box below to her website because she has some super pretty water decals. Now I went for these spring floral ones and I've cut out just 4 here, but I do end up using quite a few more in the set. But all I've basically done is cut them out as close to the image as possible, and then I'm soaking them in some room temperature water for around 20 seconds, 30 seconds, not long. And then you will find that they peel off the backing paper effortlessly and you're just able to place them down on the nail. Now, how I like to do them is peel them off the backing paper, place them roughly where I want to be with my tweezers, and then I just use a silicone tool to move them around in place. So here you can see how easily they slide off that backing paper. Just placing it down roughly where I want it to be. It doesn't have to be placed down perfectly with the tweezers because I do like to come in with the silicone tool, get it right into place. And as well, I find the silicone tool really good for getting out any creases or air bubbles that might be in the water decals. And I love French nails with art on top. So either hand painting, water decals, crystals, stamping. I just think there's something about it. It's one of my favorite designs. It's not something I do too often myself, but whenever I see a French with some art on Instagram, it's just like, wow, they're my kind of nails. So seeing as I hadn't done any in a while, that was my main inspiration for this set. I wanted to have a French nail with some water decals. I did end up feeling as though I wanted all of the nails to have water decals. I ended up leaving them off the ring finger though, because I went for crystals on that one. But on the baby boomer, I'm just taking some more of those flowers, popping them down across the fade. So once again, just moving them around into place with my silicone tool. You want to make sure that your water decals are lying super flat to the nail and you get out any bubbles, any water that's trapped underneath and any of the creases. Because if you don't get out of those water bubbles and creases, when it comes to top coating, they'll be a hell of a lot more noticeable. You may also find that your water decals will start peeling off as well, and nobody wants that when you've spent ages creating beautiful nail art. So I like to just spend that little bit longer making sure they are lying nice and flat. So I'm just going to come in on the pointer finger and finish off applying these last 3 water decals. So I'll just let you guys watch this bit and I shall jump back in a mo because it feels like I've been talking for absolutely ages. Now this is what the nails looked like when I had finished applying those water decals. So next up we're going to apply our crystals. Now I knew that I wanted this nail to have quite a few crystals on it, so I'm coming in and covering the entire nail with a thin coat of jewelry gel, and then I'm going to top coat over this. So I'm going to leave this jewelry gel wet, and then I'm going to apply my layer of top coat, then apply my crystals and then cure. Now there's lots of different ways to apply your crystals, and again there's different ways of using the jewelry gel as well. After doing it this way, I kind of felt as though I prefer to apply my jewelry gel, then the crystals, then cure, and then add my top coat, because I just felt as though top coating over the jewelry gel directly meant I couldn't remove any of it really after I'd applied my crystals. So I couldn't remove any of that thicker layer of gel, if that makes sense. And I just felt as though it looked a little bit bulky and uneven in certain places. So bear that in mind, play around with it basically. I don't do loads of crystals in my set, so it's definitely something I want to play around with a little bit more to find out ways that work more for me. I do love using the jewelry gel though. I think I just prefer to set my crystals directly in the jewelry gel only and then top coat after. But moving on to the actual crystal placement, I've popped down a large tear shaped, I think it's called, I'm not 100% sure actually, it might be a horse eye. I think it is a horse eye, a large opal horse eye from the Crystal Studio. And then I've got some smaller AB horseshoes, which are also from the Crystal Studio. And I've simply placed them down. I want them to be the main focus point of the nail. and then I'm just going to come around them with some smaller opal crystals and some smaller AB crystals just to help finish off the design. But I really liked how this looked. I loved how the large opal crystal sort of drew your attention to the crystal nail, but then there was those more crystals going along just to help finish it off into a trail. I thought it looked quite pretty, and I was really pleased with it because like I said, I don't do crystals too often, so they're not something I'm very confident with, but I thought this looked really pretty and kind of made me feel like I do need to start using crystals more in my sets. But I'm just going to again let you guys watch this step because there's not a lot I can say. I'm simply popping those crystals down into that wet gel, moving them around until I'm happy with them, and then once I am happy with them, I'll pop them into Cure. Now this is what the nail looked like once I had finished applying those crystals. I was just neatening up that gel there with my top coat brush. So I'm then going to pop this in to cure for 60 seconds, and that is the crystal now finished because we don't have to top coat that nail. So I'm then going to come in and top coat the rest of the nails. Now when it comes to top coating over those decals, I like to really float my top coat over the top of them and then brush around them just to make sure that it's got all around that decal and I know that it's fully encased in the top coat. I would then pop this into cure for 60 seconds, and if I was doing water decals on myself, I would double top coat just to ensure they last the duration of the set. But because I'm working on my practice hand, I just do the one layer of top coat because otherwise it's a little bit of a waste. But I'm just going to apply a thin even coat of this to all of the nails, and then like I said, pop them into cure. And then that, guys, is the end of the design. So if you made it this far to the end, then well done, because this was quite a long video. But I do hope you all enjoyed watching. Please let me know your thoughts below on the fact of it was a longer video. Do you guys enjoy longer videos, or are you more like myself and prefer ones that are usually under the 20-minute mark? But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below, and let me know if you liked this set. I really hope you did. And this was the finished result. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you're all keeping safe and well. If you did enjoy the video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, then please do consider hitting subscribe. And then I shall see you all again in the next video. Lots of love. Take care. Bye bye.